And at this point, please put your hands together as I welcome to the lectern the erudite, pretty damsel who is going to be hosting the next session. And this is Hadara Nashira. Please put your hands together for her. Thank you very much. Thank you. And of course, she will introduce our panelists accordingly.
So today's event is a herald of other events that not only marks his birthday, but his time as a great leader, as a great man, and one who has led the stead and stepped into the shoes of today's Nigeria that we see. I would first be calling on my panel, my panelists, very distinguished members. Most of them I have looked up to while I was a young girl, some whom I've only met through research and seen on television and some of their scholarly articles. So for me, it's a privilege to be here today. I wasn't born when most of them were in power and in the administration, but I think for us young people, this is significant to be able to see through their eyes and understand the story through their journey. I have with me on my panel, Dr. Musa Babayo, who is a Nigerian banker, businessman, politician, and elder statesman. And he, as the chairman of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, Babayo managed the transition that led to the repeal of the 1998 Tax Act and its replacement with the TED Fund Establishment Act of July 20. Dr. Babayo, please take a seat. A round of applause for him as he walks to the panel. I would also want to bring to the panel Air Vice Marshal Larry Konya, who a lot has been said, written about. I have also read. I met him for the first time yesterday, and believe me, he is a man of many parts. Very detailed, thorough, and you will hear from his own mouth and through his journey how significant today is for us as Nigerians. Air Vice Marshal Larry D. Konya attended the Stella Maris College. For most significantly, he also was enlisted in the Nigerian Air Force in 1963, and he had military, academic, and professional training in Germany, Nigeria, USA, UK, and India. And also, if you are also with the brochure, you would see that he was the member of the defunct Supreme Military Council from 1984 to 85, head logistics Nigeria Air Force headquarters, and also Armed Forces Ruling Council. Significantly, he headed the Directorate of Food, Roads, and Rural Infrastructure, DIFRI, in 1986, and was then promoted to Air Vice Marshal in 1988, retired voluntarily from Nigerian Air Force, 1988, Niger Delta Development Commission, amongst others. Please welcome to the panel, Air Vice Marshal Larry Konya. A round of applause for him, please, as he walks to the panel. I would also like to welcome to the panel a woman I like to call the lady of many firsts, Engineer Mrs. Joanna Maduka. She also is a woman passionate about women's mainstreaming in governance. And if you follow through her journey, she passed the graduate examination of the Institution of Electrical Engineers, UK, in 1966, earned an MSc degree from Trinity College, Dublin, in 1969. Please, a round of applause for a woman who was the chairperson of the Better Life for Rural Women, and also the first female fellow and President Council for the Regulation of Engineering in Nigeria. Please, a round of applause. I would also be having on my panel, he will be joining us virtually via Zoom, Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu. Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu's name rings a bell when you mention him. He was the Lord of the Economics. A Nigerian politician, served as Finance Minister of Nigeria, Minister of National Planning and Transportation Minister. He was also a presidential aspirant in 2003 in Nigeria's general election. But most importantly, he also was at the World Bank Asia and Pacific Programs Department and contributed significantly to micro and macro economic work on the economies of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. He served in various official positions in Nigeria and outside of Nigeria, including Commissioner for Finance and Planning in Imo State, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, who has already joined us virtually. You're welcome, sir. It's good to have you. And I will also be having the privilege of a man whom I call the orator of no odds, Professor Jerry Ghana, a Nigerian scholar, a politician, a one-time senator, and of course, he was also the head, the frontliner, director of the Mass Mobilization for Social Justice and Economic Recovery, popularly known as MAMSA, under the IBB administration. He also further went on to serve as Minister of Agriculture, Natural Resources in the interim national government, and became the Minister of Information, Culture, Minister of Cooperation and Integration of Africa, as well as Minister of Information and National Orientation. Please welcome, with a round of applause that resonates, Professor Jerry Ghana himself.
Oh my God. Welcome. Thank you.
It's no flattery, sir. We all know and we can resonate with that. You're welcome to the panel. It's quite significant that we're all here today. And this event resonates with a lot of people. Most importantly, I think why it is quite significant is that a lot of young people are watching and will be learning, relearning, and unlearning through this process. In the previous panel that we have listened to, we have heard the tribe and how he met and formed his tribe. We have listened to the vision, the foresight, and I know that a lot of people would also be wondering about the legacies and how that legacy has left the footprints in the sand for the Nigeria that we have today. And when you're talking about legacies, you cannot go too far without talking about the economy, the infrastructure. You're talking about the grassroots development. And you're also looking at the fact that these are the building blocks of every economy in every country. And His Excellency did it well to choose the best hands and also leverage on the experience of experts to be able to lead that administration. And those frontline steps are what we still have today in today's Nigeria. So it's an honor to have you on this panel to talk to us and to educate us, for some of us who are just coming into that awareness, and understand really what was most important in the decisions he made that has brought us to the Nigeria today. So Dr. Kalu, I would be starting with you with the economy, because I know that for a lot of people across the world who are watching us today, the Nigerian economy is something that a lot of people share, both in diaspora and here in Nigeria. But let's look at the legacies, how His Excellency's footsteps in the economy, from the programs that he did, the structural adjustment program, the policies thereof. Take us a little bit back into history. Tell us about what the economy was then and how significant it is for us to leverage on that today.
Yes, you can hear me?
Absolutely, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, you can hear me loud and clear. I was going to start by thanking Aisha and the rest of the IBB legacy team for arranging this. I wouldn't want to repeat whatever has been said before, how this is so important for us to be able to look back and glean some lessons from what we have been through over the last 50 years, shall we say. The legacy of IBB, obviously, you can talk about the economy perhaps only in relation to, second only in relation to the political, I suppose, because everybody talked about the annulment of 1993 and the rest of it. I listened to an interview and he reacted very, very forthrightly to that question. But I know that on the economy, surprisingly, up to now, there are still lingering doubts as to the essence of that program. A lot has already been mentioned in terms of opening up the economy and so on and so forth. Let me just give a little brief history. As you mentioned in your introduction, I was a member of the World Bank team that actually went to Korea. Of course, I was working on Korea a few years before that, to look at the Korean economy at the time they were facing stiff competition from their suppliers. The question was, well, what will happen to Korea if Malaysia and Philippines and Indonesia and the rest of them, who supply them with raw materials, who are now able to cut their margins to the barest minimum? You had to restructure the economy to find ways of staying in competition. It was the result of this large team that went to Korea to see how you restructure basically a labor-intensive economy into a new direction so that they can continue to grow. That was where the term structural adjustment came about. And I spent a lot of time explaining to Nigeria that it was just a name, although it became more popularized in other countries and so on. But each country's experience obviously had to be different. It had to be derived from their own peculiar conditions. There was nothing in the name that meant that your exchange rate had to go down or go up, that you had to reduce labor or add to labor. You had to now restructure your policies, taxes, tariffs, exchange rates, institutional policies, and so on and so forth. So it had to be particularly homegrown, but it had to follow a pattern of rationalization. Now, when IBB came on board, let me put it that way, and we listened to him, he said something to the effect that Nigeria needed to break this impasse with international organizations. All these discussions as to whether we were to get an IMF loan, we were to change this or change that in terms of our domestic and external policies. I prepared a paper. I was a commissioner. I see General Nwachukwu is in the audience. He was the governor. I'm not even quite sure he knew about the paper I wrote, but a lot of these programs we were pursuing at the state level in the old Imo state under General Nwachukwu. So I prepared a paper. The idea was to pass it through top member of the IBB team, specifically Commodore Ebitu Kiwe. Lo and behold, before I could even collect my paper from my secretary in Owerri, news came that I was to show up in Lagos. I couldn't go, it was too late, so I came by first flight. I got to Dodan Barracks, I saw Ebitu Kiwe, and he asked me, he said, well, they wanted my views on the economy. Again, this must be noted because like many of my friends and others, people always felt that the military, they knew their limits. They were not also broadly trained like IBB was, but even at that, they didn't have this professional knowledge. So they went out of their way to make sure that they look for people who will help implement their program. That kind of singularity of purpose is something that we need to understand and appreciate. So when they asked me my views on the economy, I was talking to General Babangida. Incidentally, he was sitting there with General Maman Vatsa, who, of course, they've been seeing me at meetings of the Council of State. Each time I came in, somebody would say, well, there is that commissioner that's always arguing about what we are doing here from Owerri, you know. So I tried to explain, and I said, well, these are the whole concept of liberalization, globalization, privatization, and so on. These were the elements of the paper I had written, but it was still with my secretary in Owerri. So IBB asked me, I said, well, I wrote a paper, but I have not even collected. So you want to go and collect it? I said, no. I said, I can write it again. Right there and then they arranged for a secretary. And I stand by one side and dictated another paper that was even longer than the one I had prepared. The only point I'm making is that I know it featured, but I wasn't really privy to how it featured. But I know that was the plank on which the whole opening up of the economy, the liberalization, opening up the employment space. And of course, you know, over the previous 25 years, we had gone from basically low-level technology, agricultural production, just as we were petering out towards the end of the 50s, lo and behold, the oil production started giving us additional resources. It is this additionality of resources to make sure that whatever we needed to do, we could then fund it. That was really what underpins the notion of an IMF loan or a World Bank loan or an ADB loan. But the intellectuals, some of the intellectuals you have to have your programs in place. But in order to implement, you needed the funding. Well, typically, as you expect, IBB had all kinds of notions. They set up a team to monitor a debate, as somebody already mentioned. The debate was liberal, open, and everywhere. I will come back from some meetings, international finance meetings. I'll come to Durham Barracks and I will be asking the president, I say, what's been going on? He said, they've been attacking him left, right, and center. And I always sort of try to assure him, I say, don't worry, we are going to pull through. So, you see, everything that has been said about his style, the way he was open, and everywhere, when people ask me, my colleagues at the World Bank or elsewhere, people have this military government. I say, no, our military government is a different style. It's a different kind of, it's not the militaristic type. Because IBB was close to everybody, traditional rulers, the politicians, the university people, and so on. And indeed, I remember, Tuji Olaguju will remember, and the article said I was suggesting certain changes, liberalization of the economy, privatization, and so on, and that some of the professors and the military people and academia fell on me. And of course, this created quite a bit of consternation. So I came in there, everybody was sort of fretting, wondering who could have done this. And perhaps it was thought that I might have assisted the London economists to do this. But eventually it was resolved because people now realize that, no, I couldn't have had a hand in writing this article and so on and so forth. But there is no question that the initiatives were amazing. And whatever problems we had with the structural adjustment was not because of the name. And I used to tell some of our colleagues, it is not the name that counts, as I have already said. It is actually the policy element that derives from the essential problems we were facing. As has been mentioned, oil price had dropped to $7, $8. That means that capacities that have been created, we could not fund it to full capacity for the technical capacity as well as for the employment. We had to reduce the involvement of government in flour mills, bread making, and all kinds of other projects. This is the whole essence of privatization. But for privatization, certain things were set out in terms of making sure that those who will be taking over are those who have the cash to pay back government, resources that could now apply to the social sectors and other sectors where government should squarely be dealing with education and health and so on and so forth. It should be people who understood the technology, whether it is power or refining or whatever. Thirdly, people who had competence in managing that sector. And lastly, those who could see the vision of where the newly privatized enterprises should be going. And of course, this does not say it had to be within the Nigerian boundary. You could get somebody from Hungary or from Yugoslavia or from Argentina, but make sure that we then put in place structure that will now begin to train Nigerians, not only to buy into these enterprises beyond the initial capital, but also people who can develop the skills to manage them. So some of the problems are now decisions we had to make. But what I'm trying to say is that it is a pity that from all indications, even as recently as this year, people are still not quite clear what the structural adjustment was all about. Most countries have had to undergo it. There is no specific period that is referred to as structural adjustment period. As long as the economy is changing, you have to design new rules to make sure that you keep up with the new requirements for younger labor force, for new areas like you have Nollywood, new areas of technology, and so on and so forth. This is what the structural adjustment is, a continuous process. But there was a lot of misunderstanding, not only by the masses, as I say, market women were debating this, but even on campuses, even some of our colleagues in the profession were somewhat not quite clear what this was going to be. And IBB kept, he kept on it despite all this opposition. And I think we have to really credit him with the tenacity to stay on once his vision was clear. Now, the other area, of course, is once you decentralize, you liberalize, you have to have the right institutions. Somebody already mentioned the issue of the banking sector. Of course, what we do is not to prescribe who takes what. You lay down the rules and give the incentives and the legal regulations, and now throw it open to those who can apply and work with it. So you didn't specify any particular persons or so who will be given refineries to take over or steel mills to take over. You lay down the rules, and as IBB himself pointed out in a very telling interview just a few days ago. In fact, I called Aisha. I was so excited when I listened to him that, wow, he still had the vigor to state these policies, how he preferred market-driven mechanisms. I remember giving a talk at the University of Ibadan, and they said, oh, Dr. Carlo talks about other issues other than market forces. I said, what did you expect? So I don't want to dwell on this. I don't want to repeat what has been said, but I think I really appreciate having people like Larry Konya. And I mean, these were people now on the ground trying to implement some of the agricultural rural development projects. And of course, there's a whole list of this. I cannot go into all of this. And then the issue of debt management, the issue of economic diplomacy. General Ike Nwachukwu is there. When he was foreign minister, a lot of this happened. And I hope Bolaji Akinyemi is also around. One doesn't have to go into all of these areas, but there is no question that the leadership style was what really endeared people to IBB. And some of us had the temerity to run for politics. I was a candidate, not an aspirant. I went beyond an aspirant to a candidate, and I ran on the platform of New Nigerian People's Party, but it was not to be. But the idea really was that you democratize the political space, you liberalize the economic space, you make sure that the context for the evolution of the currency is something within the market. That was so badly understood. And of course, we didn't follow very closely the dictates of the market signals for saving and investment. Will go wrong, and then when we go wrong, we can't go and control the exchange rate. All this will impact on the exchange rate. So it is not the IMF or the World Bank or the professors or the ministers. Ultimately, it boils down to how the whole policy environment is managing changes in the economy, in production, in resource allocation, in the management of our debt, and so on and so forth. Lastly, what I want to talk about, of course, is the essence of restructuring. The restructuring, the most important rationale of restructuring, of course, is to decentralize power to the producing, directly productive sectors as close to the people as possible. In fact, my idea is that and I've written a lot about this, but not too many people are buying it because they say, no, we've tried everything. We should push this thing further to the local government level, where the local government can implement so many projects aside from the really major ones, where people in the local governments, irrespective of where they originally come from, relate to that local government. We will have as many as half of what we have now, with bigger powers, with the political rights given to every citizen within that local government and so on. I know eventually, if we are going to emerge as a modern confederal state, that is where we are going. But we'll see how that goes. And I want to endorse all the comments that have been made. All these problems that we've had with the economy are really behind all this quest for a more confederal power structure, or perhaps division into different states. But I think for those of us who grew up under Nigeria in the 40s and 50s and 60s, who were there during the war. I was back from my graduate work to finish my dissertation when the war started. So I was here throughout the war. It was after the war I went back, finished my dissertation, and somebody came to recruit and saw my thesis and said, oh, you should be at the World Bank. That's how I ended up there. But the focus was on coming back home as quickly as possible. And that's what brought me back home. I said, I wouldn't want my children to grow up abroad. I want them to grow up in Nigeria. And before you knew it, from being a consultant with Pius Okigbo and others in Enugu, I was called to serve as Commissioner for Finance under the Buhari regime. And then within a few more months of that, another military tune, and we all ran for our dear lives. I remember I took refuge in Chief Iwanyanwo's house in Owerri, and later they called us and said, where are you going? I said, well, we don't know who is coming now. So it was after that speech that IBB made that I was very encouraged to write down all these elements of reform. And when I came and talked with them in Lagos, of course, I was told I would be the Minister of Finance. Later, they came back again talking about planning. I said, well, somebody said, no, we already got him for finance. So they went back again, and my dear friend Chu came in as National Planning Minister, and so on. And of course, I went on to transport, where we started this, as you mentioned, Federal Urban Mass Transit, and so on. And then coming back later with General Abacha when we worked on the value-added tax, which was now introduced in 1994. But the moving spirit behind all this was this kind of genial environment which IBB encouraged. He went everywhere, he was liked everywhere. There was opposition, there's no question about that. Even in areas where we were succeeding, people didn't like it. When we introduced some of these measures in Old Imo State, because things like where the commissioner had to be reporting every month. This is what we've got, this is how we spent it. When I came to Lagos, I said, this is what we were doing in Imo State. And some colleagues didn't quite like it. They said, you think you are in Imo State? And IBB said to the Secretary to Government, said, draw up a roster. Every minister will have to be reporting. That's how we started the ministerial briefing, and so on and so forth. And the clean up days, which we have now made a little bit of a joke out of it, we started in Imo State at that time. We came to Lagos. Eventually, this is what we started this general cleaning and so on. And several of these programs, well, maybe General Ikenwachukwu is there. He can speak to some of these things. But more precisely on the economy,
Absolutely.
we need to go back, as Chidoka in his excellent presentation said, we have to go back. We have to go back. I'm really convinced that it is accidental we are together as a nation with 350 ethnic nationalities. But we have to really take a hard look at it before we now begin to pull apart the way that is being asked.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of these people really don't have the deep hindsight that some of us have. We'll give it the shot we have. The country can still pull it out. The rest of the world is still expecting so much from us, so we should not give up too quickly.
Absolutely.
So, kudos to IBB. We wish him more healthy years ahead of him. He's welcome to the Octogenarian. Some of us are there already, and I think we should really applaud him for his contribution. And I was so pleased to hear him talk so vigorously, and he certainly wasn't sounding like somebody in the 80s.
Yes, indeed.
In the interview that he gave. So it's my pleasure, and thanks again to Aisha and the team that organized this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very insightful. We'll still come back to you, Dr. Kalu. I mean, talking about institutionalizing central bank autonomy, establishment of Nexim Bank, he also established the Bureau de Change of today, and the 6334, system in the educational sector. Let me come to Dr. Musa Babayo now, before I come to rural development, which is a big space. You've heard it. You've heard what he said. He's a people person. He's oriented in bringing people along. He was very, very passionate when it came to interchanging ideas. And in today's world, I think that is one of the most important attributes of a leader, a team player, someone who's people-spirited. I know that you probably may have not been in that administration, but you have a close relationship with IBB. Now tell us how significant this is. His ability to connect and also know the personalities to choose and see the bright light in people.
Thank you very much, Adora. President Babangida, like you have rightly said, is someone that I have not met while he was in office as president of this country. An event happened, in fact a tragic one. 20 years ago, there was an armed robbery attack in my family house. It was violent. Massively, no one lost his life, but many were badly bruised. 3 days after, my security guard came into my house and said, "There's a guest who wants to see me." Then she looked at me. I was taken aback. That gentleman was the former president in company of Alhaji Ahmadu Abubakar, late ABM Mohammed. I was shocked beyond belief. I ushered them in, we sat down and he said, "This is why I'm here. One of your friends told me what happened. And I decided to pass a liquor and commiserate with them." That coincided with a period when I was writing a doctoral thesis on some of the major economic crises facing the nations of Africa. After he left, I decided to make a U-turn, basically to look at some of the economic reform agenda of his administration while he was president. That led me to a change of topic to economic diplomacy as a new face in Nigerian foreign policy. It's now a book, Economic Diplomacy in Nigerian Foreign Policy. In understanding basically the economic management model of Babangida administration, we should not lose sight of where we were before he came in. So it's important to look at the historical facts of the Nigerian economic structure right from independence. We had an economy that was structured and designed to serve the needs and interests of colonial Britain and not that of the colony. That structural distortion and disarticulation were carried through up to mid-1980s. And by mid-1980s, the Nigerian economy was facing a major national crisis. A crisis of rising imports, falling prices of goods, which were the main source of funding of government activities. And by 1987, the situation was really so pathetic that the nation current account position was so small, insignificant as to finance our import for 30 days. That was the midst of the economic crisis we are in as a nation. Earlier on, the Economic Stabilization Act, otherwise known as austerity measures, was introduced by administration before that of IBB. But they failed to address some of the fundamental defects of the domestic economy. So the Lord fell on him to make a decision that had to pull the nation from a valley of despair and hopelessness where we were then, with the hope of placing it on the path of sustained growth and development. We have just listened to the Minister of Finance. Structural Adjustment Program was one of the major policy initiatives of that administration, with the primary objective of deregulating completely the economic environment. We have heard so much this morning and early afternoon of some of the early impacts and achievements of that particular economic program. You had the resurgence of agriculture. The others who will talk on that will make specific example. which grew by more than 4%. We had a return to exports as one of the mainstays of the Nigerian economy. Textile industries that were moribund all of a sudden came back to life. The garment and textile industry, for example, grew by about 3% within the first 2 years of some implementation. The synthetic fabric subsector of the textile and garment industry grew much more, by over 6%. The financial services industry witnessed a phenomenal growth from just about 20 to 22 deposit money banks. We had over 120 of them within a period of 2 years. Why? Because the sector was liberalized. There was free entry, free exit. Excessive regulation kills competition. By removal of some of those restrictions and bureaucratic bottlenecks, young and upwardly mobile Nigerians were encouraged to take a profession in banking and finance. We saw a resurgence of finance houses. We had over 600 of them within a period of 3 years. Over 400 in the public financial services subsector of the financial services industry. We had about 428 community banks. Quite a number of people have forgotten about the community banks and the role they played in helping the nation to manage some of the most difficult challenges impacting on it during that period. You had over 228 people banks that were equally licensed. So even the poverty question was approached from a structured position. The resultant effect, an increase of specialized manpower manning this critical sector of our national life. This afternoon, Osita was talking about GT Bank. You have so many other banks that today they are combined revenues more than the GDPs of most states in Africa. Those things were not happening accidentally. They were a result of carefully laid out policies and actions and strategies of the man in charge of the moment. And that was President Ibrahim Barabasi. I think the level of achievements that were put on the ground at the time when the total foreign reserve at the time he came into office was barely $1 billion USD, $932 million. That was what it was in 1987. The highest amount ever recorded during that period in 1991 was 4.04. We are talking of 35 billion USD today. But in spite of those major negative challenges impacting on the nation within the financial sector, a lot have been said that the regime has been able to achieve the massive infrastructural development of the country. The first dualized roads in the northern part of this country, Abuja Kano, was done during that period. The movement to Abuja, amongst others. I don't need to go into the details because other speakers have already mentioned them for the lack of time. But suffice to say that the deregulation of the economic life of this country led for the first time to the decision by the government then to abrogate the indigenization decree of 1978. That decree, as good as it was at that point in our history, has done so much to restrict the level of foreign direct investment into the country. And immediately after the promulgation of the decree, what happened? You had massive investment, especially in the oil and gas sector of this country. 136 licenses were issued. 85% of those licenses were taken by expatriate companies, creating massive employment opportunities within the gas and oil industry of this country. So it was up now. The marketing boards, if you will recall, in order to help ordinary farmers and Nigerians who are within the vulnerable group, the regime scrapped the marketing boards in order to cause a connection to happen between the producers of the cash crop and the final buyers. That has helped significantly in returning back the groundnut farmers in Kano, the cocoa farmers in Ondo. The resultant effect, a positive growth in the gross domestic product of this country. These are, among others, some of the major policy economic measures that were unleashed positively on the nation during the IBB years. And like other speakers have rightly said, it's important to look at some of the achievements, some of those policy prescriptions, so we'll be able to begin to develop policy responses to some of the monumental economic challenges that are negatively impacting on the Nigerian state. When you get the economy right, it's a natural conclusion that the politics will equally be right.
Thank you so much. And you know, when you were speaking, the elimination of price control came to me as well as part of those removal as well during that era. Reduction of import duties, you know, opening up the export sector, yes, during that administration. And it is quite very critical and very instructive to note that the rural development and grassroots development was very key during that administration.